Hey, happy 2024 everyone! The past year has been absolutely crazy for me. I landed a new job, I got a Blue Lock channel, and now I hit 1,000 subs. Genuinely, thank you so much for all your support in the past months. It really means the world to me. So to celebrate, I asked my viewers to send me some questions, and I got some great responses, so I'll try to answer everyone's questions in detail. And in advance, apologies if this video ends up being kinda long because I suspect it will. From Neko Neko, I'm just curious about Michael Kaiser. Is there any theory about him, or hints you can see about his backstory from his character design and through Ness's story? That's a fun question actually. Let me give this my best shot. And I'm gonna assume here that you've seen my recent video on Blue Lock's backstories. So the most important hint we got about Kaiser's past from the Ness backstory is that Kaiser probably had some high-flowing aspirations, but he got battered down right before meeting Ness. I strongly suspect there's going to be a class aspect to this. Maybe it's another rags to riches story, just like we saw with Lorenzo. I've got a few reasons for that. First of all, money and wealth are really important concerns in the Neo-Egoist League arc. That's something I've got a few thoughts on, so you can find these in my video on Blue Lock's capitalist hellscape. Anyways, it makes sense to me that those issues are tied together with the arc's major antagonists. Then there's of course the much discussed spread contrasting Kaiser's ragged ball to his expensive imperial regalia. And all of that intersects in really interesting ways with his signature blue rose tattoo, which is looking to be a fascinating multifaceted symbol. For one, roses are often associated with wealth and status, so I can imagine that the blue rose represents achieving the impossible for Kaiser, in part because it stands in for a socio-economic status that was out of reach for his younger self. At the same time, however, roses are probably the most extensively bred and hybridized flowers in the world. The wide variety of types and colors of roses reflect centuries of human intervention in a biological process. So in that light, if Kaiser is like a rose, you could say he's a person who has been molded in the image of others. Whether that's by Noah's philosophy of extreme rationality, or by someone at an earlier point in his past. And yet, the rose metaphor suggests that these efforts won't bear fruit. After all, no matter how much you try to cultivate roses, you will never dye them a blue color. And here it's interesting that the metaphor of dyeing someone in someone else's colors was introduced very early in the NEL. But if we're talking about Kaiser as a rose, it's hard to ignore the third association of a rose. It's a beautiful plant with prickly thorns. And just like that, Kaiser's football is elegant and mesmerizing. And yet, his conduct pushes others away from him. That's what we're seeing unfold over the course of the NEL, as Kaiser's empire is gradually pruned away. Anyways, that's some rapid-fire ideas and associations. I'm not sure if it's in any way coherent, but we'll see how it plays out at least. Talking about roses, here's one from my friend Serena Rosa. Serena asks what my interests are outside of YouTube and manga, and who has my favorite or least favorite backstory. Thanks for the question, Serena. I have to admit that I don't have any wild hobbies, in case anyone's disappointed now. For one, I'm into board and tabletop games. I have a regular D&D group where we play about once a week, and I'm actually also designing a game of my own at the moment. Although, it depends a bit on when I find the time for it. I also like spending time in the kitchen. I recently got into making kombucha, and I'm also trying to get better at baking breads. I play video games as well, although I haven't had a lot of time for that since starting the channel. Fire Emblem has been my favorite game series for over 20 years. I've got an unhealthy relationship with Slay the Spire, and I just started playing Hades over the Christmas break, which I'm pretty sure is a terrible idea for me. Regarding the backstories, my favorite one is actually Bachira's. That one just really hits me on a personal level. As you might have surmised from my videos, I'm a bit of an obsessive person myself, and I've also not always been the best at fitting in with groups. So those scenes where we see Bachira trapped and isolated because of his passions, afraid that he'll never find anyone who understands him and who he can relate to. Let's just say there's a lot I can recognize, I can relate to there. The image of Bachira's love for football as an all-consuming monster that guides him to greater heights, but simultaneously haunts and shackles him. To me, that's really powerful stuff. And for what it's worth, the one scene in Blue Lock that's almost guaranteed to make me tear up is when Yu Bachira sees her son and Isagi together during the U20 match, and she realizes that Bachira's finally found a place where he truly fits in, where he truly belongs. Oh, and as for least favorites, I don't really have one, I think. There's none that I think are really bad. I guess maybe just Naruhaya is the one I find least inspired. And, well, I mean, that's because he's, not a prototypical egoist. He's one of the characters who doesn't fit in with this Blue Lock idea. But, I mean, I don't dislike it or anything. And for the rest of my viewers, in case you haven't seen it yet, Serena and I have actually made these bingo sheets with our predictions for the PXG match. So keep an eye out on our community sections if you want to follow along, because I'm really curious to see how both of us do. And definitely go check out her content as well. Serena is one of my favorite Blue Lock creators on the platform, and it's always a joy to talk with her. Next, from Antonio Enrique. How did you find out about Blue Lock, and what was your first impression of the first chapters? So honestly, I can't tell you exactly how I found out about Blue Lock. It was one of those titles I remember seeing mentioned a lot in late 2020. So I just had this quick look to see what it was about, and the premise, it just seemed kind of interesting to me. Now, I'm a very structured, disciplined person, so I've got a rule that I will finish reading one manga series before starting a new one. And at that time I was reading the manga A Condition Called Love, which is actually a fantastic feel-good romance manga that I'd highly recommend. Anyways, Blue Lock had piqued my curiosity, so I told myself I'd just quickly check out Blue Lock's first chapter one evening. But then I started, and I just couldn't stop. So from there, I still made myself read A Condition Called Love in the mornings, then, went about my tasks for the day, and immediately when evening came, continued reading Blue Lock. I was just hooked. I caught up. The chapter I caught up with was the final chapter of the Manshine match, and I was absolutely excited to do Blue Lock content. I've been an avid manga reader for the majority of my life, and there's few series I've enjoyed so much following them on a weekly basis as Blue Lock. I actually dropped my first Blue Lock video fairly quickly after I caught up, since I just wanted to pick the manga apart because I thought there was so much interesting stuff going on there. And, well, that's where we are now. So here's a question that I did kind of see coming from Tyler Frenzy. What the hell and why the hell is your PFP the way it is? So I was hanging out with friends on Discord on one evening. This is, I'd say, like 2 years ago by now. And somehow the topic went to what if Pokemon had teeth, or, realistic teeth. So that led us to photoshopping teeth onto pictures of Pokemon, and I'll just say it, the absolute winner of that evening was me putting that pair of teeth onto a Quagsire. And it's just a picture, it's, cracked everyone up. It still cracks me up to this very day. I might have made a bit of mistake when I turned this into Blue Lock channel because I thought, you know, I want to distinguish it from my second channel, so I'll add a pair of Blue Lock logos for eyes. And yeah, that kind of did turn something that was, you know, a bit cutesy, a bit wacky into this horrifying monster. So that's on me. Sorry about that. From Trishula the Best Boy, 2 questions. More about you than anything. Where are you from? Did you go to college? And if so, what major? Also, Rinvid, please. And from Clouds, your in-depth analyses are awe-inspiring. How have you developed the skills for that? I think many of us would like to learn a bit from and about you. Greetings from a recent subscriber. Cloud, thanks so much for the question. It's really nice to just hear from people who joined up recently. And as for Trishula, I also just want to let you know I really appreciate you shouting me out on Reddit a few times. Those kind of things just make my day. So yeah, no, it's great seeing you in here as well. Anyways, these are 2 questions that kind of touch the same ground, so I decided I'm just gonna give you a whole info dump and combine the 2 in one, if that makes sense. So how I got here. I studied Latin and Ancient Greek in college and then continued with a PhD in Ancient Greek poetry, which means I've been fortunate enough to get to analyze literature as my full-time job for 4 years, which I'm still like, that's super cool. I then decided to leave academia because I wanted to try something new, but at the same time, I didn't want to just give up picking texts apart because that's the thing I really loved about being in academia. So that's basically what led me to start the channel. I was, and yeah, I still am, super excited to combine the skills from my research with my long-standing passion for manga. Now, I know that's not a very helpful answer for someone who might be interested in thinking a bit deeper about manga. And I want to stress that you really don't need to spend 9 years in college to have interesting things to say about the medium. That's just the route I happen to take. But in case you might be interested, I can give you a little peek in the kitchen. In general, most of my videos start with me noticing something that I find interesting, and those are often just some kind of small detail. And from there, at some point I realized how that small detail forms part of a much bigger picture. So let me take as an example my video on rationality, because I know a bunch of people have watched that. So the first time I read this scene where Isagi confronts Yukimiya during the Manshine match, it really jumped out to me that Isagi appealed to reason and logic. I was like, hey, Isagi has just internalized BM's philosophy, hasn't he? It was the kind of thing where I intuitively felt that it would be an important moment in his character arc. So I made a mental note of that, and it just kind of stuck with me. And from that point on, I kept picking up these small things about Isagi being associated with rationality here and there over the course of the Manshine and the Ubers match. So now, flash forward a few months. I was reading through comments about Blue Lock chapter 234, and I came across quite a bunch of people who were being annoyed at Kaiser for acting irrationally. And that's when I had this epiphany, this aha moment, that really sparked the video. I was thinking, wait a minute, yeah, they're right. Kaiser is supposed to be this epitome of irrational football. But it's undeniable that he's becoming more and more irrational, more and more unhinged over the course of the arc. And what's more, that's actually, in a way, a contrast, a really interesting one as well, to Isagi's development and Isagi subsuming this philosophy of extreme rationality. At that point, I realized that this would make a great video topic. So then I reread the NEL specifically to see where Isagi and Kaiser act irrationally and how different characters talk about rationality more broadly. I've also, by the way, gotten into the habit of just writing down my random observations. let's just say that I know from experience that you'll forget at least 50% of your flashes of inspiration if you don't jot them down as soon as possible. I have a bunch of files that I just fill with these half-baked ideas and observations because I just never know when I'll pull something off the shelf, when something might become relevant, and then I'll be very grateful to my past self. Anyways, that's probably way more extensive than you were bargaining for, so apologies for that. As for where I'm from, I'm an international mess basically. And I don't really want to go into detail about that for privacy reasons, so apologies for that. But what I will say is that I currently live in Ireland, but I'm not Irish myself. Now, regarding the Rin video, that's a bit of a weird one for me. I've noticed that a lot of people recommend my channel for character discussion, but you know the funny thing is, that's not really how I think of what I do. Even in my more character-centric videos, my interest is usually how that character's storyline intersects with the overall narrative. So for example, when I discussed Kunigami's downfall, I tried to situate his elimination within the wider context of the second selection. So here's the thing with Rin. For me, discussing Rin is synonymous with discussing the U20 match, since that's where his character arc, his storyline really culminates. I feel like I can't really analyze one of them without analyzing the other. And I've been wanting to do a dedicated U20 analysis for the longest time. But the thing is, that's the most beloved arc in all of Blue Lock, so I feel way more strongly than usual that I have to nail that one. And just to make that a bit more concrete, my ambition is to cover the U20 match along similar lines to my Ubers analysis. It'll be basically a feature-length, 1-hour-ish video with an extensive section on Rin, similar to how the first 20 minutes of the Ubers video are virtually a complete breakdown of Barrow's character arc throughout the entire manga, so that's kind of what you have to think there. Now, when that'll happen is still a bit in the air, I'm just gonna be honest with that, since that's a massive project, the kind of thing where I'd probably need to sit down for a full month to get it done, and you'll never know when I'll find that time. Now, what I will say is I'll definitely have it done before Season 2 of the anime finishes, just because I want to be able to funnel anime viewers who just finished the U20 match to my video, but other than that, I'm afraid I will have to ask for some patience. But on the bright side, I'm sure that we'll, in the PXG match, get plenty of material for me to discuss, and I will, very likely be covering Rin in that capacity sometime soon, so, look forward to that. From Akatsuki, going through your videos, I checked out your video on Kaguya-sama. It was a really nice video, by the way. Oh, thanks so much. So, out of the entire cast, who were your top 3 characters and why? Thanks so much. I really poured my heart and soul into many of those non-Blue Lock videos, and it makes me really happy to hear that people enjoy them. To be honest, maybe even a bit more than some of my Blue Lock videos. And that Kaguya-sama video is really special to me as well, because it was basically the first video I ever did that got any, amount of traction whatsoever. Anyways, my favorite character from Kaguya-sama is Yui Ishigami. For one, I think he's the best written geek character I've ever encountered in fiction. I just love his arc, I love the way how he develops and comes into his own, finds his place. But there's also something kind of, I appreciate about Kaguya-sama more broadly, which is how it promotes this kind of softer, more emotionally vulnerable kind of masculinity. And I think the manga really nails that with Ishigami. I love that he gets integrated into the community through his empathetic sides, and that when he displays some interests that are, considered traditionally feminine, the other characters actually celebrate him for that. So I just think that's super cool. Number 2 is Miko Ino. Let's just say I generally like characters with a strong sense of justice or with rigid ideals, and I think Kaguya-sama does a fantastic job showing Ino struggling to live up to her ideals because of her insecurities, and with her learning how to relate to others without compromising on her beliefs. Number 3 is going to be either Kaguya or Miyuki Shirogane, and I've talked about them a lot already in my analysis, but I just really like both of them a lot as well. And actually, Kaguya-sama in general has such phenomenal casts. I'd really love to do a follow-up video on its side characters now that kind of all fits together into one whole, because there's just so much powerful stuff in there. No idea when I'll find the time for that, but someday before I die, that video will exist. From Woodward, do you have a favorite chapter? I love 137 the most. Chapter 137 is an excellent choice. I really love that one as well. And for those who are wondering, that's the one where Baro scores in the U20 match. Future Sean here. I realized I misspoke the number in my original recording, so what I wanted to say is my favorite chapter is 64, which is the one where Isagi forces Baro to pass to him. The reason for that might be a bit unorthodox, but basically that's the chapter I realized Blue Lock was the real deal. So when I started the manga, I wasn't quite sure if the series would follow through on its premise, that it would offer this kind of unconventional, psychotic approach to the sports genre. And for the most part, it doesn't really help that the first selection is kind of a power of friendship story, albeit in an unconventional way. So I just wasn't sure how serious I could take the premise at that point. So when we get the conflict between Isagi and Baro in the second selection, I was expecting it to be resolved with Baro becoming a team player. That kind of standard shonen fare. But instead, Isagi humiliates Baro and makes him submit to his will. That scene just gave me such goosebumps when I first read it, and right then I realized I was reading something truly special. That's kind of, I'd say, the moment when Blue Lock was just this, addicting manga to something where I thought this has real literary merit, I guess. From Vicent Knight, I have 2 questions. How can Isagi and other Metavision users be outplayed by non and also sane Metavision users? For example, how Rin vs Sai back in the U20 arc led Isagi to score. And secondly, what are some flaws about the latest Ubers vs BM match? Do you hope to be fixed by the next game? Great questions there. So Metavision is still a weird one for me, in that the ability was introduced with just this unprecedented amount of hype for what's basically just paying better attention to your surroundings, if I'm going to boil this down to the most banal way possible. I think that's why a decent portion of the Ubers match was dedicated to bringing our expectations back down to earth after, Isagi had hyped it up that he'd become basically God because of Metavision in the Manshine match. So just to kind of give you a sense of how I think of Metavision at the moment, my sense is that its big advantages are that it gives players a better grasp of the field and thereby lets them react faster than anyone else. And that's still, regardless of everything we've seen in the Ubers match, a massive deal. But it's not absolutely game-breaking. For one, we've seen that there are simply physical specs that matter a lot. That having Metavision doesn't help if you can't get the ball on time or find a shot course. And, these characters without Metavision have still been able to foil Metavision users to trip up Isagi regardless. And secondly, the Ubers match highlighted that even Metavision doesn't give you perfect vision, since that's just not possible with human anatomy. So for example, we see Isagi outsmarting Nico by prompting him to narrow his field of vision. And later, he also scores his winning goal by having everyone follow his gaze, which is exactly how he opened up a shot course for him and Hiyori. You could kind of compare Rin versus Sai to Isagi versus Nico in a way. Rin's evolution forced Sai to focus all his attention on Rin, and that's how Isagi could get into position to score. I guess what this boils down to is that a match with 22 actors is just simply too complex for any single player to track. And so it'll never be possible for just one player to outmaneuver everyone else on the field. And I think that's a good equilibrium for Blue Lock's power system to be at the moment. Regarding this second question, I first have to say that I actually really like the Ubers match, and it's only been getting better for me over time. But nevertheless, I would say that it struggles more in getting its major ideas across than most other Blue Lock matches. For the majority of the weekly experience, I felt like it consisted of a number of disparate plot points here and there that I just couldn't piece together. And even after it clicked for me, I needed a full hour video to explain why everything happened the way it did. A second thing I still feel a bit conflicted about is the whole character focus aspect. Because on the one hand, we got some of the most phenomenal character writing in the series with characters like Barao and Snuffy and Hiyori, as well as some important progress for Kaiser and Isagi, right? But nevertheless, it did take away from some of my personal favorites. You know, I would have loved to see some more characterization for someone like Aiku, or Nico, or Raichi, or Yukimiya, for instance. But to be honest, I'm not sure if that would have been feasible, especially with all those fans who are moaning that the match was taking too long already as is. So to be honest, I think that's something where a lot of people should temper their expectations for the PXG match, because there's only so much character focus, so much spotlight that can go around. And I'm a bit skeptical myself if, you know, those characters from PXG who are not Rin and Shido and maybe Karasu will get any significant character focus. From Foxy VR, what is one weapon in real life that you would like to see expressed or used in Blue Lock? So thanks a lot for that question, but I'm kind of afraid I'm really out of my depth on this front. So just to confess here, I'm not really into sports at all in the real world, so outside of manga, and I just don't know enough about football to be able to say anything, intelligent on this front. But in general, I think that Blue Lock's football is at its most interesting when it leans into the tactical aspects of the sport, the positioning, the vision, that kind of stuff. So I'd love to see anything that would give us more of that. MM writes, I would love it if you would do an analysis on As the Gods Will or Jagan, the other works of the author of Blue Lock. There is amazing material there and could really make lots of fans understand the true depth of this creative team and how a great author writes great characters and egos. So that's actually great to hear, because I haven't read any of Kaneshiro's other works yet, and I really want to. They're basically the next on my priority list to have a look at. I think regular viewers know that I hold Kaneshiro in incredibly high regard as a writer, so I'm just really looking forward to trying his other works. As for an analysis, that's in the cards for sure. One of the reasons I did a video on the Blue Lock light novels was that I just wanted to gauge the temperature to see if there's any interest in me doing stuff that I'd consider more, fringe, more Blue Lock adjacent stuff, not like the canonical manga. And that video got a good reception actually. I was surprised by how well it did. So that gave me confidence that people might tune into some more stuff like that. And I'd consider a video on Kaneshiro's other works something there, as long as I just managed to spin it properly. Now, I won't guarantee anything, because I'm kind of strict with myself that I only make videos about series on which I feel I have something to say, and series that I find personally very interesting. Okay, so that was a lot longer than I planned for, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. And let me know if you found this interesting and if you'd like to see another of these, at some point in the future, another Q&A video. Because I had a lot of fun doing this, and it gave me a nice break for the holidays as well. Also, just to give you a peek into my plans for the new year. At this time last year, the channel was absolutely tiny, less than 100 subscribers. And my main concern was just getting out there, just to convince people that I've got interesting things to say. But now, I think I've done that. I hit my subscriber target for the year, and it's been incredibly cool to see that people are starting to take notice of what I'm doing. So that's just amazing. So now for this year, my goal is to push the envelope even further, to inject new elements into my formula, and to really shake up how you think about Blue Lock. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in my next video. Just as a warning, it will be very different from my usual fare, and quite research heavy as well, but I promise it'll be super interesting. I'm hoping to get it done in 2 weeks' time, but just to be honest, I can't guarantee anything on that front. But I'll keep you in the loop, and I hope you'll give it a chance. I hope you give it a shot, and that I'll see you again soon.